Sunday lunch at Mom's house had become a monthly tradition that I'd started to dread. Not because of the food Mom made excellent roast chicken, but because it had evolved into a 2-hour showcase of everything my sister Michelle had accomplished versus everything I apparently hadn't. This particular Sunday in November was no different. I'd arrived at 1 p.m. sharp in my 12-year-old Honda Civic, parking behind Michelle's brand new BMW X5 and her husband Brad's Tesla Model S. The driveway looked like a luxury car commercial, except for my dented sedan that had seen better decades. "There's our little penny pincher," Michelle announced as I walked through the door, her voice carrying that particular tone of sisterly affection mixed with condescension that I'd grown accustomed to over the years. Mom greeted me with a hug and the usual worried expression. "Rachel, honey, you look tired. Are you eating enough? I worry about you trying to make ends meet on that tiny salary." "I'm fine, Mom," I replied, hanging my coat in the closet next to Brad's $3,000 designer jacket and Michelle's collection of designer purses that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The living room was its usual stage for Michelle's success story. Brad was sprawled on the leather sectional, scrolling through his phone and occasionally chiming in about his latest real estate ventures. Michelle was curled up in the armchair, wearing what I recognized as a $400 sweater, discussing her promotion to senior marketing director at the advertising firm where she'd worked for 6 years. "So the Peterson account alone is worth $2.3 million annually," she was telling Mom as I settled onto the couch. "They specifically requested me to handle it because of my track record with luxury brands." "That's wonderful, sweetheart," Mom beamed. "What about you, Rachel? How are things at your... What is it you do again?" This was the question I'd been dreading. For the past 8 years, I'd been deliberately vague about my work, partly because it was complicated to explain and partly because I'd grown tired of the skeptical looks whenever I tried to describe what I actually did. "I work in financial services," I said, which was technically true. "Still at that little credit union?" Michelle asked, not looking up from her phone. "That's sweet. It's nice that you found something stable, even if it doesn't pay much." I didn't bother correcting her assumption. 8 years ago, when I'd first started working in finance, I had indeed worked at a credit union for exactly 6 months, while I was learning the business from the ground up and building relationships with potential investors. But explaining that I'd since founded Cascade Capital Management, one of the most successful private equity firms on the West Coast, seemed pointless when my family had already decided I was struggling financially. "The important thing is that you're making ends meet," Brad added helpfully, finally looking up from his phone. "Not everyone needs to be wealthy to be happy." This from a man whose idea of financial struggle was having to choose between the Mercedes and the Porsche for his weekend car. Lunch was served in the dining room, where the conversation continued its predictable pattern. Michelle and Brad discussed their recent vacation to Italy, their plans to renovate their kitchen, and Brad's latest real estate investment, a commercial property in downtown Seattle that he was converting into luxury condos. "The construction loan alone is $4.2 million, Brad said, cutting into his roast chicken with obvious satisfaction. "But the projected returns are incredible. We're looking at 8-figure profits when the units sell." "That's amazing," Mom said, clearly impressed. "You two are just so good with money." Michelle smiled modestly. "Brad has such a good eye for investments. The property was actually in foreclosure. Some family business that couldn't make their mortgage payments. We got it for 60 cents on the dollar." I continued eating quietly, trying not to think about the fact that I'd probably financed Brad's construction loan through one of my fund's real estate investment vehicles. Cascade Capital managed $8.3 billion in assets, and commercial real estate was one of our primary focuses. The odds that his project was funded by my money were actually quite high. "What about you, Rachel?" Brad asked, apparently feeling generous enough to include me in the conversation. "Any big financial plans? Maybe saving up for a new car?" He glanced toward the window where my Honda was visible in the driveway. "The car runs fine," I said simply. "Well, that's practical," Michelle said, though her tone suggested she found my practicality rather sad. "Though at some point you might want to consider an upgrade. Image matters, especially if you want to advance in your career." "My career is going well," I replied. "Is it though?" Michelle set down her fork and fixed me with the kind of concerned look usually reserved for interventions. "Rachel, I say this because I love you, but you've been working at the same level for years. You're 34 years old, still driving a car from 2011, Still living in that tiny apartment, still shopping at discount stores. There's nothing wrong with being frugal, Mom said gently, though her tone suggested she agreed with Michelle's assessment. Frugal is one thing, Michelle continued, but at some point you have to invest in yourself if you want to get ahead. Look at Brad and me, we spent money on the right clothes, the right car, the right connections. That's how you signal to people that you're successful. Brad nodded sagely. It's all about perception in business. If you look like you're struggling, people assume you are struggling. I looked around the table at my family, Mom with her worried expression, Michelle with her designer everything and her conviction that success was measured by visible consumption, Brad with his easy confidence that came from never having to build anything from scratch. You're probably right, I said quietly. This seemed to encourage Michelle. She leaned forward, warming to her favorite subject. I could help you, you know. I have connections in finance, real finance, not just credit unions. My friend Stephanie works at a wealth management firm downtown. They're always looking for entry-level advisors. Entry-level, I repeated. Well, you'd have to start somewhere. You can't expect to jump straight into senior positions without the right background. But Stephanie says they provide excellent training, and the earning potential is really good for people who apply themselves. Brad nodded. Wealth management is where the money is, though you'd probably need to upgrade your wardrobe first. Clients won't take advice from someone who looks like she shops at Target. I do shop at Target sometimes, I admitted. Michelle and Brad exchanged a look that was equal parts pity and exasperation. Rachel, Michelle said gently, you're a smart woman. You deserve better than this. But you have to want better for yourself. You have to be willing to take some risks, make some investments, put yourself out there. Like what kind of investments? Well, start with your appearance. Get some professional clothes, maybe do something about your hair. Then think about your living situation. You can't bring clients or colleagues to that apartment. I don't really bring work colleagues home, I said. Exactly. That's the problem. Networking is everything in business. How are you supposed to advance if you're not building relationships with successful people? Mom patted my hand sympathetically. Maybe Michelle could introduce you to some of her friends. Successful people who could mentor you. I'd be happy to, Michelle said. Though honestly, Rachel, some of it has to come from you. You have to stop being so content with mediocrity. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Mediocrity. Is that what they thought of my life? You're right, I said again, because it was easier than explaining that I'd built a private equity firm that managed more money than most people could comprehend. After lunch, we moved to the living room for coffee and dessert. The conversation shifted to holiday plans. Michelle and Brad were going to Aspen for Christmas. Mom was planning to visit her sister in Phoenix. I mentioned that I might work through the holidays, which prompted another round of concerned looks. You work too much for too little money, Michelle observed. That's not sustainable, Rachel. You're going to burn out. The problem is she doesn't have anything to show for all that work, Brad added. If you're going to put in long hours, at least make sure you're compensated properly. Maybe it's time to consider a career change, Mom suggested gently. Something with more growth potential. I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with a text from my assistant. Chen Industries deal closed successfully. $340 million acquisition finalized. Congratulations. I glanced at the message and put my phone away, but Michelle had noticed the interruption. Work texting you on Sunday? She asked disapprovingly. That's what I mean about boundaries. They're taking advantage of you because they know you won't push back. It's fine, I said. It's not fine, Michelle insisted. You need to learn to value yourself more. Demand better treatment. Ask for what you're worth. And what do you think I'm worth? I asked, genuinely curious. Michelle considered this seriously. Well, given your experience level and education, you should probably be making at least $60,000. Maybe 70 if you negotiate well. Brad nodded. 75 if you're really good at your job. I almost choked on my coffee. Last year, Cascade Capital's management fees alone had generated $127 million in revenue. My personal compensation was somewhat higher than $75,000. That does seem reasonable, I managed to say. The point is, Michelle continued, you have to advocate for yourself. Nobody else is going to do it for you. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation took an even more painful turn. Michelle started talking about her and Brad's financial planning, their investment portfolio, their retirement accounts, their plans to buy a vacation home in the San Juan Islands. We're on track to have a net worth of $2 million by age 40, Brad announced proudly. That's the goal anyway. Financial independence by 40, then maybe early retirement. $2 million sounds like a lot, Mom said, impressed. It's a good start, Michelle said modestly. Though really, you need at least $5 million to retire comfortably these days. $10 million if you want to maintain a nice lifestyle. I nodded politely while mentally calculating that my personal net worth was currently sitting at just over $400 million, not counting my equity stake in Cascade Capital. What about you, Rachel? Brad asked. Are you saving for retirement? Building any kind of investment portfolio? I have some investments, I said carefully. Like what? A 401k through the credit union. Something like that. Michelle leaned forward with renewed concern. Rachel, please tell me you're not just keeping your money in a savings account. Even basic index funds would be better than that. I know about index funds, I assured her. Do you, though? Michelle's voice took on the patient tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a child. Because a lot of people think they understand investing, but they really don't. It's more complex than just putting money into random stocks. Brad nodded. You should probably talk to a real financial advisor. Someone who can explain asset allocation, risk management, compound interest. I understand compound interest, I said. Understanding it and implementing it are two different things, Michelle replied. Look, I don't want to lecture you, but you're 34. You should have been seriously investing for at least 10 years by now. I have been investing for 10 years. In what? How much have you managed to save? I looked around the room at my family's expectant faces. Mom genuinely worried about my financial security. Michelle convinced she needed to save me from my own poor decisions. Brad smugly confident in his role as the family's financial success story. It's hard to say exactly, I replied. The markets fluctuate. Michelle sighed. Rachel, if you don't even know how much you have saved, that's a problem. You need to be tracking your net worth, monitoring your investment performance, planning for different scenarios. Maybe you could help her, Mom suggested hopefully. Show her how to set up a proper portfolio. I'd be happy to, Michelle said, though honestly, at her income level, there probably isn't much to work with. She might need to start with something really basic like a target date fund. The condescension was becoming unbearable. I finished my coffee and stood up to leave. Already going? Mom asked, disappointed. You just got here. I have some work to catch up on, I said, which was true. Sundays were usually when I reviewed investment reports and prepared for Monday morning strategy meetings. See, this is what I mean, Michelle said, following me to the door. You're working all the time, but you have nothing to show for it. That's not sustainable. As I was putting on my coat, Michelle grabbed my arm gently. Rachel, I'm serious about helping you. Let me introduce you to Stephanie at the wealth management firm. Maybe we can get you an interview. That's very kind of you, I said. And think about what we discussed. The clothes, the car, the apartment. If you want to be taken seriously in business, you have to look the part. I hugged Mom goodbye, accepted her usual container of leftovers, and headed for my Honda. As I was backing out of the driveway, I could see Michelle and Brad through the window, probably continuing their discussion of my financial inadequacies. The drive home took 20 minutes, during which I had 3 conference calls with investors in Singapore, London, and New York. Time zones were tricky when you managed global investment portfolios, but Sunday afternoons were often the only time to coordinate between Asian and European markets. My tiny apartment was actually a 3,200 square foot penthouse in one of downtown Seattle's most exclusive buildings, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Elliott Bay. I'd bought it 5 years ago through a holding company to maintain privacy, paying cash to avoid the complicated financial disclosures that would come with a mortgage application. I spent Sunday evening reviewing acquisition reports for Cascade Capital's latest deals. We were in the final stages of purchasing a chain of boutique hotels in California, negotiating the takeover of a struggling tech company in Austin, and considering a major investment in renewable energy infrastructure across the Pacific Northwest. Monday morning brought the usual rush of activity. Market opens, conference calls, investment committee meetings. I was in my office on the 48th floor of the Columbia Center by 6 a.m., reviewing overnight developments in Asian markets and preparing for a 7 a.m. call with our Hong Kong partners. My assistant Jennifer knocked and entered with the morning's priority items, contracts that needed signatures, investor reports that required review, and a list of phone calls I needed to return. Also, she said, consulting her tablet, Michelle Thompson called the main line this morning. She said she's your sister and wanted to speak with you about a personal matter. I told her you were in meetings, but she seemed quite upset. I frowned. Michelle calling my office was unusual. She had my cell number and she'd never shown any interest in where I worked or what my office looked like. Did she say what it was about? Something about a mortgage issue. She said her bank told her to call this number. Understanding dawned slowly. I pulled up my personal investment tracking system and searched for Michelle's address. Sure enough, there it was, 847 Maple Street, Bellevue. Purchased 3 years ago for $890,000 with a mortgage of $712,000 from Pacific Northwest Bank. The mortgage that Cascade Capital had purchased as part of a distressed asset portfolio 6 months ago. The mortgage that was currently 3 payments behind and heading toward foreclosure proceedings. I'd known about the investment, of course. I personally approved all major asset purchases, but I hadn't connected Michelle's address to the broader portfolio of underperforming loans we'd acquired from Pacific Northwest Bank when they'd needed to clean up their balance sheet. Please get Michelle Thompson on the line, I told Jennifer. The call connected within 2 minutes. Rachel? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you all morning. Michelle's voice was strained, panicked. Something terrible is happening. Our bank says our mortgage has been sold to some investment company, and they're threatening foreclosure. Slow down, I said. What exactly did the bank tell you? They said Pacific Northwest sold our loan to something called Cascade Capital Management, and that we're behind on payments, which isn't true. We've never missed a payment. I pulled up the detailed payment history on my screen. 3 missed payments over the past 4 months, plus late fees and penalty charges. Michelle, according to the records I'm looking at, there are 3 missing payments since July. How would you know that? And why did they give me this number to call? I asked to speak to someone in charge, and they said to call Cascade Capital directly. The pieces were falling into place. Michelle had called the main Cascade Capital line, given her name as Michelle Thompson, and asked to speak to someone about her mortgage. Jennifer, not making the family connection, had simply scheduled the call like any other client inquiry. Michelle, I said carefully, where exactly did you get this phone number? From Pacific Northwest Bank. They said Cascade Capital owned our mortgage now, and if we had questions, we should call the owner directly. Priva, I'm scared. They're talking about foreclosure proceedings. We could lose our house. I was staring at the mortgage file on my computer screen. Michelle Thompson and Bradley Thompson, 847 Maple Street. Original loan amount $712,000. Current balance $687,000. 3 months delinquent, foreclosure proceedings authorized. Michelle, I need to ask you something. Have you and Brad actually been missing mortgage payments? No? Well, maybe we were a little late a couple times, but we always paid. Brad's been dealing with some cash flow issues on his development project, so we had to juggle some payments, but we always caught up. How late is a little late? I don't know, maybe a month or 2 sometimes. But we always paid eventually. I closed my eyes and tried to process what was happening. My sister, who had spent yesterday afternoon lecturing me about financial responsibility and the importance of building wealth, had been defaulting on her mortgage payments while buying luxury cars and planning vacation homes. Michelle, being a month or 2 late on mortgage payments is the same as missing them. The bank considers any payment more than 30 days late to be a default. But we paid them. Maybe not exactly on time, but we paid. When was your last payment? Brad handles all that. But I think it was maybe August or September. It was November. They hadn't made a payment in at least 2 months, possibly 3. Michelle, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You and Brad are in serious financial trouble. Your mortgage is in default and you're facing foreclosure proceedings. That's why I'm calling. Can't you help us? You work in finance. You must know people who could help us negotiate with this Cascade Capital company. I stared out my office window at the Seattle skyline, trying to figure out how to explain that I was Cascade Capital, that I owned her mortgage, that I was the person she was asking me to negotiate with. Michelle, I need to tell you something. What? I am Cascade Capital. I'm the CEO and founder of Cascade Capital Management. The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. That's not funny, Rachel. It's not meant to be funny. Cascade Capital Management is my company. I founded it 8 years ago. We manage $8.3 billion in assets, including your mortgage. That's impossible. You work at a credit union. I worked at a credit union for 6 months in 2016 while I was building Cascade Capital. I haven't worked for anyone else since then. More silence. Rachel, this isn't funny. I'm trying to save my house and you're making jokes. I'm not joking, Michelle. Google Rachel Thompson Cascade Capital if you don't believe me. I heard rapid typing, then a sharp intake of breath. Oh my God. Oh my God, Rachel, is this real? Are you really? It says here you're worth $400 million. The number fluctuates with market conditions, but that's approximately correct. This can't be real. Yesterday you said you couldn't afford gas money. No, yesterday you said I couldn't afford gas money. I agreed with you because it was easier than explaining that I choose to drive an old car and live modestly. But why? If you have all this money, why do you live like what? Like someone who values things other than material possessions? Like someone who doesn't need to signal wealth through conspicuous consumption. Michelle's voice was barely a whisper. You own our mortgage. Cascade Capital owns your mortgage, along with about 300 others that Pacific Northwest Bank needed to sell to improve their balance sheet. Can you help us? I can explain your options. You're currently $18,347 behind in payments, plus penalties and fees. You can either bring the mortgage current by paying the full amount owed, or we can discuss a loan modification if you can demonstrate ability to make future payments. $18,000? We don't have $18,000. This was rich, considering Brad's Tesla probably cost more than that in options alone. What about the Italian vacation you took last month? The kitchen renovation you're planning? Brad's 8-figure real estate development. That's different. That's investment money. And your mortgage isn't an investment? Michelle was crying now. Rachel, please. You're my sister. Can't you just forgive the debt or something? Michelle, this is a business. I have investors, fiduciary responsibilities, legal obligations. I can't just forgive debts because of personal relationships. But we're family. Yesterday, when I was family, you told me I needed to learn financial responsibility. You said I should ask for what I'm worth. You said I needed to stop being content with mediocrity. That's different, is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been living beyond your means, making poor financial decisions and expecting other people to bail you out of the consequences. The irony was almost too much to bear. Yesterday, Michelle had lectured me about the importance of building wealth, maintaining good credit, and making smart investments. Today, I was discovering that she'd been defaulting on her mortgage while buying luxury items and planning expensive vacations. Rachel, please. We could lose everything. I looked at Michelle's file again. The house was worth about $940,000 in the current market, so even in foreclosure, they'd walk away with some equity. It wasn't like they'd be homeless. They'd just have to buy something they could actually afford. Michelle, I'm going to connect you with our loan modification department. They'll work with you to explore options. But you and Brad need to understand that this requires demonstrating genuine ability to make payments going forward. What does that mean? It means selling the BMW and the Tesla. It means canceling the Aspen vacation. It means living within your actual means instead of the lifestyle you think you deserve. We can't sell our cars. Brad needs the Tesla for his image. Clients expect successful developers to look successful. Brad's image is what got you into this mess. You can't afford the lifestyle you're trying to maintain. But what will people think? People will think you're being financially responsible instead of heading toward bankruptcy. Michelle was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was small and defeated. How did this happen? How did you become so successful while we're losing our house? It was a fair question. How had the sister who couldn't afford gas money ended up owning the mortgage of the sister who drove luxury cars and vacationed in Europe? I built something instead of just spending money to look like I had built something, I said. I focused on actual wealth creation rather than wealth signaling. I don't understand the difference. Wealth signaling is buying expensive things to make people think you're successful. Wealth creation is actually becoming successful, regardless of what people think. But you said yourself that image matters in business. No, you said that. I said my career was going well. You assumed it wasn't because I didn't look the way you thought successful people should look. Jennifer knocked on my office door and held up a note. Board meeting in 10 minutes. Michelle, I have to go. I'm going to have our loan modification team call you this afternoon. They'll explain your options. Rachel, wait. Can I ask you something? What? Why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling? I considered this question while looking out at Elliott Bay, where a container ship was navigating toward the port that handled billions of dollars in trade, some of it financed by Cascade Capital Investments. Because I wanted to see if you'd love me when you thought I was unsuccessful. Turns out the answer is yes, but with a lot of condescending advice and pity. We do love you. I know. But yesterday you loved me despite thinking I was a failure. Today you'll love me because you know I'm successful. The question is, which version of love is real? After I hung up, I sat quietly in my office for a few minutes before heading to the board meeting. Outside my window, Seattle bustled with Monday morning energy. People heading to jobs, building careers, making financial decisions that would determine their futures. Somewhere in Bellevue, my sister was probably staring at her computer screen, trying to reconcile the image of her financially struggling sister with the reality of a $400 million net worth. Somewhere in the same house, Brad was probably calculating whether his Tesla lease payments were more important than keeping their home. The board meeting was routine: quarterly performance reviews, new investment opportunities, strategic planning for the next fiscal year. Cascade Capital was having an excellent year, with returns that exceeded our investors' expectations and growth that positioned us well for future expansion. But I found myself thinking about Sunday lunch, about Michelle's conviction that success was measured by visible consumption, about the assumption that my modest lifestyle meant modest achievements. Maybe it was time to buy a nicer car. Not because I needed to signal wealth, but because I could afford it and I might actually enjoy it. Maybe it was time to stop hiding behind deliberate invisibility. Or maybe the real lesson was that family dynamics don't change just because your net worth does. Michelle would always be the sister who thought she knew what was best for everyone else. I would always be the sister who preferred substance over show. The difference now was that when she gave me financial advice, I could politely refer her to her loan modification specialist. Sometimes the best revenge really is massive success, especially when your family doesn't notice until you own their debt.